Dawn hadn't broken yet. On the dry road that ran straight as a knife cut across the Cimarron Valley, 3 shapes came out of the gray, moving at an even pace, in no hurry, and that absence of hurry was the thing to be afraid of. Hurry meant something had gone wrong. This pace meant something had been planned a long time ago. On the roof, a woman set her hammer across her knees. She hadn't heard anything. She looked up because of something older than fear. Below her, the October wind threaded through the stand of juniper. The chickens hadn't been fed. And at the north corner of the barn, a patch of ground had settled so evenly that only someone who had been watching it for 4 years could see what lay sleeping beneath it. 5 years she had waited for this to begin. The man in front sat his horse like someone who had once worn a badge. His eyes swept both sides of the road out of habit. Then he looked up at the roof, and something crossed his face that she had not expected. The roof needed fixing. Not the letter on the kitchen table, not the name at the bottom of it, not the 3 men she had been expecting for 11 days. The roof, 3rd plank from the chimney, west side. Lifting since August. One hard wind off the Sangre de Cristos, and the whole section would curl back like dry skin off a knuckle. Jonas would have fixed it in July. Jonas would have spotted it in June. But Jonas had been in the ground for 5 years. And the roof had been Vera's problem since the morning she found him face down in the south field with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from sleep. She climbed up before sunrise, took the hammer, took the nails, took her time. The ladder leaned left, always had. She compensated by keeping her weight to the right, which her knees had opinions about. Her knees had opinions about everything these days. She had learned to ignore them the same way she ignored most things that complained without offering solutions. The planks were cold under her palms. October cold. The kind that settles into your hands and stays until noon. She worked without gloves because gloves made her slows, and she had no patience for slow. Not this morning. The Cimarron Valley spread below her in the gray before dawn. She had always loved it from up here. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, in the stubborn, undecorated way of high desert country, but because from the roof she could see everything. Both directions on the road. The far ridge to the north. The dry creek bed along the eastern fence. The stand of juniper that marked where her land ended. And the grazing territory Gideon Lark had been quietly expanding for 3 years. Like a man who mistakes patience for permission. She drove the first nail. The sound went flat and sharp through the cold air. She drove the second. Then she looked up. Not because she heard anything. The road was still empty, still pale, still running straight as a surveyor's line toward the horizon. She looked up because something in her chest did the thing it used to do in the records office in Santa Fe when a piece of paper crossed her desk that didn't add up. A small, quiet tightening. Not alarm. Something older than alarm. Recognition. She set the hammer across her knees, waited. And then, at the far edge of the northern road, right where the scrub flattens before the long curve toward Ridgeback, 3 shapes came out of the gray. Riders, 3 of them moving at an even pace. No hurry, which was worse than hurry. Hurry meant something had gone wrong and men were reacting. This pace meant something had been planned and men were executing. Vera watched them for a moment. Then she picked up her hammer and drove the 3rd nail. She finished the plank. Started on the 2nd one. Let them come. She had known they were coming since Nettie Pruitt's letter arrived 11 days ago. Folded inside a grocery invoice, which was how Nettie passed information she didn't want read by eyes that weren't hers. Vera had unfolded it at the kitchen table, with her coffee still steaming, and read the 12 words Nettie had written in her cramped, careful hand. 3 men asking questions in Ridgeback. 1 used to be law. Watch the road. 12 words. Nettie never wasted more than she needed. Vera had read it twice, set it in the stove, watched it go. Then she had spent 11 days getting ready. Not the kind of ready that involves checking rifle loads and sitting in dark rooms waiting for shapes to appear in doorways. That kind of ready was for people who didn't know what was coming. Vera knew what was coming. She had known the shape of it, roughly, for 5 years. She had been filling in the details ever since. Getting ready, for Vera, looked like writing letters, organizing papers. Going through documents she had read so many times she could have recited them without looking, but which she needed to produce in the right order at the right moment with the right amount of calm. Not the calm that comes from not being afraid. The other kind. The kind that comes from having done everything you can do and understanding that the rest is no longer in your hands. Getting ready looked like a conversation with Harlow Finn at the Ridgeback post office 3 weeks prior. He had been passing through on his way from Santa Fe to Taos, which he did twice a year, which she had counted on. Harlow wrote for the Santa Fe Daily New Mexican. She had known him 6 years. Long enough to know he was thorough, honest, by the standards of frontier journalism, and hungry in the way that good reporters are always hungry. For a story that mattered, she had told him, give it 3 weeks. Stay close to Ridgeback. When you see riders heading up toward Cimarron, come out the next day. He had looked at her for a long moment, written something in his notebook. Said he would be at the rooming house until she sent word, 23 days ago, which meant Harlow was still waiting, which meant she had to make this week count. She drove the last nail into the second plank and sat back on her heels and watched the 3 riders come closer. They were on the main road now, no longer just shapes. She could make out the horses. 2 bays, 1 gray, and the way the men sat in their saddles, which told her things before they opened their mouths. The first man rode like he had worn a badge for years. Straight-backed, deliberate, eyes sweeping both sides of the road by habit, big through the shoulders. A man accustomed to arriving at places and having people pay attention to the arrival. That would be Rafe Cord. Nettie had written, used to be law. Everything about him confirmed it. The second man rode like he was calculating. Slightly behind the first, but not deferential. More like a man who preferred to observe a scene from 1 step back before committing himself to it. Packed. Still. She had known men like that in Santa Fe. Men who thought in sequences, who arrived already building their case. Silas Quint, the third man, was young. She could tell from a quarter mile away just by how he moved. The slight looseness of it. The absence of that careful rigidity that settles into a man's body somewhere around 40 when his joints start demanding more consideration. He would be Darrow Besh. 26, Nettie had said. Fast. New to this kind of work, but not new to what lay underneath it. Vera watched them another moment. Then she looked back at the chimney. There was a 4th nail that needed driving. She drove it. By the time she climbed down, they were at her gate. She took her time on the ladder. Left hand on the rail, right hand carrying the hammer, stepping down rung by rung the way you do when your knees have opinions. But you are not going to let your knees set the schedule. Doc that, Johns. Set. She reached the ground, set the hammer on the porch rail, turned to face the 3 men without any particular expression. They were watching her, all 3 of them. Rafe Cord sat on the bay horse closest to the gate, hands resting easy on the saddle horn, eyes on her face with the kind of steady attention that was either professional assessment or something older than that. She couldn't tell which yet. Silas Quint had already looked past her to the house, the barn, the fence line, the storage structure at the east corner, cataloging, building his picture. Darrow Besh was looking at the hammer on the porch rail. Mrs. Cull, Cord said, not a question. He knew who she was. You know where the gate latch is, she said, a beat. Then Cord reached down and lifted it. The 3 of them rode through. She did not invite them inside immediately. That was deliberate. She stood on the porch and waited while they tied their horses and approached, and she looked at each of them the way she used to look at documents in Santa Fe. Without rush, without performance. Simply reading. Cord came first. 6 feet, perhaps an inch over. Gray coming in heavy at the temples. A face that had made many decisions, most of them difficult, and wore the evidence without apology. His coat was good quality, but had seen years of use. Boots worn down at the heel in the way of a man who covers ground on foot as often as horseback. The gun belt sat low and natural on his hip. Not a showman. The opposite of one. He stopped at the base of the porch steps, held her gaze, and for just a moment, one beat of something, a thing moved across his face that she had not expected. Not the blankness of professional encounter. Something else. Something that reached back along the thread to a memory she had filed away a long time ago and not opened since. She kept her face still. Quint stopped beside Cord. He had a leather satchel over his shoulder that bulged with the rectangular discipline of organized paperwork. His eyes were already on the front of the house, in the way of a man appraising a property he intends to act on. Besh stopped 2 paces behind them both. thumbs in his gun belt in the way young men hook their thumbs when they want to look easy, and have not yet understood that looking easy and being easy are separate things. He glanced at her once, looked away, looked back. "We've ridden from Ridgeback," Cord said, "on behalf of Mr. Gideon Lark." "I expect you know the name." "I do," she said. "Then you know why we're here." "I know why Mr. Lark thinks you're here," she said. "Come inside." Coffee's been on since 4. She had 3 cups on the table before they were seated. The kitchen was plain, a working kitchen. Dried herbs on the ceiling rack. A stack of ledgers on the shelf beside the window that Quint's eyes went to immediately and stayed on a moment too long. A cast iron stove that had been burning since well before dawn and radiated the deep-settled warmth of a fire that has been tended well. 2 windows, both clean. The table was square. 4 chairs. Vera took the one nearest the stove, back to the wall, both windows in her peripheral vision. An old habit from her years in Santa Fe, where the records office had taught her it was useful to see who was approaching before they reached the door. Cord sat across from her. Quint took the chair to her left, set his satchel on the floor, did not touch his coffee. Besh stood near the door for a moment, then sat, like he was still deciding whether sitting was a commitment he was prepared to make. Cord reached inside his coat, produced a folded document, set it on the table, pushed it toward her. She did not reach for it immediately. "You want to tell me what that is," she said, "or should I just read it?" "It's a notice of legal claim," Quint said. His voice was precise, the voice of a man who chose words the way other men chose tools. "For function, not appearance. Filed in the territorial court in Santa Fe. Mr. Lark's attorneys have established a prior lien on this property, specifically on the water rights associated with the Cimarron tributary running through the southeast corner. The notice gives you 7 days to respond with countervailing documentation, or vacate pending adjudication." "Silence." "That's a lot of words," Vera said. "They're accurate ones, some of them." Quint's eyes came to hers. "A small adjustment. Recalibration." She picked up the document, unfolded it, read it completely, not skimming, taking in every word in sequence, noting the structure, the language, the formatting. Not for the content. The content was almost certainly fraudulent. For the technical architecture of it. Because documents constructed to deceive have tells, and the tells are always in the architecture. There were always tells. A forged document was like a garment sewn by someone who knew how to sew, but had never worn what they were making. Every seam was correct. Every proportion was almost right. But something was wrong in a way that only became visible to someone who had worn the real thing long enough. She read it twice. Found it on the second pass, the signature block at the bottom. Judge Ira Cantrell, 1st Territorial District, Santa Fe. She had copied that signature in her capacity as land records clerk no fewer than 400 times over 11 years. She knew the way Judge Cantrell formed his capital C, the leftward lean of it. The way the loop closed tight, then opened slightly on the downstroke. The C on this document closed differently. Small difference. Very small. The kind of thing that meant nothing to anyone who had not spent years in close daily contact with the original. But she had, and it didn't. It's my document on the table. "You did not push it back, Mr. Quint." She said, "Yes, when you file a land notice in the 1st Territorial District." "Which clerk typically receives the original documentation?" A pause. Quint's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "I'm not sure what." "Because for 11 years it was me," she said. "I received every document that passed through that office from 1860 to 1871. I copied every signature that needed countersigning. I filed every record in that building. I know what a valid filing from that court looks like." She put her finger on the signature block. "This isn't one." The room went quiet. Darrow Besh had stopped moving near the door. Quint looked at the document, then at her finger, then at her face. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Rafe Cord had not moved. He held his coffee cup in both hands and had been looking at it for half a minute, and she had been watching him the way she used to watch men in the Santa Fe courtrooms when evidence was presented. Not for their faces, for what happened in the rest of their bodies when something landed close to something they carried. He set the cup down, looked up at her, and she saw it again, that thing that had crossed his face at the gate. Not blankness, the opposite. The expression of a man who has recognized something and is deciding what to do about the recognition. She let the silence run a little further. Then, where were you in the spring of 1871, Mr. Cord? Nothing changed in his face, but his right hand resting on the table beside the cup moved inward, one involuntary inch. Like something had pulled at the muscle from inside. I've been in a lot of places, he said. Santa Fe, she said. April. Courtroom of Judge Harlan Reese. Not Cantrell. Cantrell had just been appointed and hadn't taken the district yet. A land fraud case. Hollis and Lark. Disputed grant on the eastern Cimarron. She watched him. You were called as a witness, she said. You were serving as deputy marshal out of Taos at the time. You had seen the original transfer document. You were prepared to testify. That case was dismissed, he said. It was. She picked up her coffee. The night before testimony was to begin, your deposition was withdrawn from the court record. You were removed from the witness list. No explanation was filed. The case was dismissed 3 days later for insufficient evidence. She drank. Set the cup down. I was the clerk who received the withdrawal notice, she said. I filed it. I noted the date, the time, and the name of the man who delivered it. I did not note what I thought about it, because it was not my place to put my thoughts in the record. But I thought about it for a great many years afterward. Cord looked at her for a long time. Something in his face that she found hard to name. Not anger, not guilt exactly. More like the expression of a man who has been carrying a weight for years and has just been told by a stranger that they can see it. You quit that same year, he said. I did. Why? Because I had spent 11 years filing documents and copying signatures and maintaining the legal architecture of a territory, and I had watched that architecture be used, again and again, to give power to men who had already taken enough of it, and I decided that was the last case of that kind I was willing to be a quiet part of, a beat, and then I came here, she said, and I married Jonas Cull. And I had 14 years of something different. She stood, took the document from the table, folded it, tucked it in her apron pocket. I'm giving you 7 days, she said. The same 7 days your document specifies. Not because the document is valid, because I need 7 days. And it happens to line up, Mrs. Cull. Quint started. You're welcome to use the barn tonight if your horses need rest, she said. There's a well on the east side. I'll have something on the stove by 6 if you haven't ridden back to Ridgeback by then. She walked toward the door to the back room. Stopped. Turned. Mr. Cord, she said. He was still at the table, both hands around the coffee cup, looking at the place on the table where the document had been. He looked up. When you've decided which side of this you're standing on, she said, come back and knock. I'll be up. She went through the back room and out to the yard, where the morning had finally committed to being morning, and the light was laying itself gold across the top of the juniper stand, and the chickens were making their opinions known about the lateness of their breakfast. She fed them, stood in the yard with the empty bucket and the thin October sun on the side of her face, and let herself be still for just a moment. 7 days. She had written Harlow Fenn's letter 3 weeks ago. She had filed the claim with the U.S. Surveyor General's office in Santa Fe 4 weeks ago. She had been building what she needed to build for 5 years. 7 days was more than enough. She went back inside. They did not ride back to Ridgeback that evening. She heard them in the barn around dusk, the low murmur of 3 men's voices, horses settling. The quiet that falls over a camp of men who have things to discuss, but are not certain they can trust the air around them. She stood at the kitchen window and did not try to make out the words. What they were saying to each other did not matter. What mattered was that Rafe Cord was out there. She ate supper alone at the table. Thought about the spring of 1871, which was now 14 years ago, and felt someday like something that had happened to a person she used to be. She had been 33 years old, her hair still more black than gray. She had been good at her job, which was something she had always cared about more than was perhaps practical. She had cared because the job was, at its foundation, about documents, about the dry, precise language of legal fact. And legal fact, correctly recorded, was one of the few things in a territory that still ran partly on violence, that could not be bought or burned once it was properly set down, except that it could be. She had learned that. The withdrawal notice in the Lark case had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in April. She remembered clearly because she had been eating a biscuit at her desk when the door opened. The man who delivered it was not a court clerk or a marshal. He was someone she had never seen before, in a suit more expensive than anything worn in a government office. And he had set the envelope on her desk without speaking, and left without signing the delivery record. Irregular. She had noted it in her private record. The small leather notebook she kept herself. Never left at the office. The date. The time. The description of the man. The color of his suit. The ring on his right hand. She had a very good memory. She had always had a very good memory. It had made her excellent at the job. It had also made the job, finally, unbearable. Because she could not stop remembering what she had seen, could not file it away, could not close the drawer on it and go home. She had quit in July, moved to Taos for a year, then to the Cimarron Valley when she was 35, because she had heard the land was still mostly open and a single woman could file a claim if she had the right documentation. Vera had the documentation. She had always had the documentation. That was the thing about 11 years in the Surveyor General's office. When you left knowing exactly how everything worked. You left knowing where the real records were and where the copies were. You left knowing which signatures were legitimate and which had been reproduced so many times they had drifted from their origin like a word that changes meaning through overuse. And you left knowing that certain claims registered before the Homestead Act came to New Mexico territory. Sat in a separate legal category, one that existed under federal authority rather than territorial court authority, one that Gideon Lark's lawyers, sharp as they apparently were, had not known to look for. She'd been counting on that for 4 years. She finished supper, washed the plate, sat back at the table with her small leather notebook, the one she still kept, still bought herself, still never left where people she didn't trust might find it, and wrote down what had happened that day, the document, the signature, what she had said, what Cord had said, what had happened in Quint's face when she put her finger on the signature block, every detail. In order. Because that was what you did when you had a good memory, and you knew that what was happening around you was going to matter later. You didn't rely on memory alone. You put it on paper. You created a record. You made it real in the way that only written things are fully real. She closed the notebook, looked at the window. Dark now, full dark. The barn light still on. She waited. The knock came just before 10, not loud, not hesitant. The knock of a man who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it on the doorstep. She opened the door. Rafe Cord stood in the dark with his hat in his hand, which she noticed because men like him did not often take their hats off in deference, and the fact that he had done it here meant something she filed away for later. "Can I come in?" he said. She stepped back. He came in and she closed the door and went to the stove and put water on because she was not sure yet what kind of conversation this was going to be, but she was fairly certain it would be long, and long conversations were better with something warm in your hands. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, still holding his hat, looking at the ledgers on the shelf beside the window, the same ones Quint had looked at that morning. But Cord's look was different. He wasn't cataloging. He was reading the spines, recognizing the format. "Those are government record formats," he said. "They are. You kept copies. Not a question." "I kept everything," she said. "In 11 years, I made a personal copy of every significant document that passed through the office. Not because I was planning for any specific future. Because I had a good memory and I was careful, and I believed that records were the only thing in this territory that could outlast a man's willingness to lie." He turned, looked at her steadily. "The Hollis case," he said. "Yes. My deposition was in that record, the original." Before the withdrawal, his jaw moved, once. The motion of a man tasting something bitter and deciding whether to swallow it or spit it out. "They told me the case had been transferred to federal jurisdiction," he said, "that my testimony would be required by a federal marshal's office instead. That the withdrawal was a formality." "There was no federal transfer," she said. "I know that now. You suspected it then." A long pause. "Yes," he said, "and you didn't pursue it." He looked at his hat. "I was a deputy marshal in Taos," he said. "Lark had 2 territorial judges and a congressman by then. Pursuing it would have meant—" He stopped. "Would have meant what?" "Would have meant what happened to your husband," he said. "Probably." The kitchen went quiet. The water was beginning to move in the pot. She let his words settle the way you let a stone settle in water. watching the rings spread outward, noting how far they reach before they disappear. "What do you know about my husband?" she said. He looked up. "I know Gideon Lark paid a man $200 in the fall of 1880, he said. "I know that man rode towards Cimarron Valley. I know Jonas Cull was dead inside a week. How do you know that?" "Because the man Lark paid was someone I had arrested twice before. He drank. He drank in Ridgeback the night before he rode out towards Cimarron. I was in Ridgeback tracking a different man, and I heard him talking, and you didn't—" "I didn't know it was about your husband," he said. "I didn't know who Jonas Cull was. I didn't put it together until 2 years later, when Lark's name came up in a different context, and I started following the thread backward." She looked at him for a long time. "2 years," she said. "Yes, my husband had been dead 2 years before you put it together. Yes." She turned and took the pot off the stove and poured the hot water over the coffee grounds and did not say anything for a moment because she was deciding something. Not whether to be angry. She was past the kind of anger that required deciding. Something else, whether to trust him, not completely. She did not trust anyone completely. Complete trust required a certainty about the future that Vera had learned early and permanently the world did not provide, but partially. Enough. Because Cord had knocked on her door at 10 o'clock when he could have stayed in the barn. Because he had taken off his hat. Because the look on his face was not the look of a man constructing a story. It was the look of a man who has been carrying one for a long time and has just set it down carefully, hoping it doesn't break when it lands. She brought the coffee to the table. He sat across from her. "Let me tell you what I have," she said, "and what I'm going to do with it. Then I need you to answer one thing." "What thing?" "Whether when the time comes you're going to be in the barn or on the porch." He wrapped both hands around the cup, didn't answer immediately, which was the right response. The wrong response would have been instant. Instant answers to questions like that come from people who haven't actually thought about them. He thought about it. Then, "Tell me what you have," she told him. Not everything. She was not foolish enough to hand a man every card in the first conversation, regardless of which way she thought the cards were going to fall. But enough, the 11 years of records she had kept. The prior grant registration she had filed on this property in 1869, before she married Jonas, under a claim derived from a Mexican period grant in legal limbo since the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, registered directly with the U.S. Surveyor General's federal office, not the territorial court. The fact that this registration existed in a federal system entirely outside the jurisdiction of Lark's territorial court filings. She told him about the forged signature. She told him about the letter she had sent to the Santa Fe Daily New Mexican and the conversation with Harlow Fenn. She did not tell him what was in the letter. Not yet. He listened without interrupting. There was a kind of man who listened to a woman explaining something technical and spent the listening time visibly preparing his next question rather than taking in what was actually being said. Cord was not that kind. He listened the way she had learned to read documents, completely, in sequence, without assuming he knew what was coming next. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The prior grant registration," he said. "That's what Quint doesn't know about." "Quint found 2 sets of records in Ridgeback today," she said. "The homestead filing under Jonas's name and what I believe was a reference to the prior claim. But he won't understand it. It's not a format that was in common use by the time Quint was doing Pinkerton work. It predates him, but you know what it means. I wrote it," she said. "I know exactly what it means. Lark is going to push harder," Cord said, "when Quint reports back. When Lark finds out the document was recognized as forged. He won't wait out your 7 days, I know. He'll send more than paperwork. That's why the next 4 days matter more than the last 5 years combined." He looked at his coffee. Then at her. "What do you need me to do?" he said. And that was when she understood which way the cards were going to fall. Not because he'd said the right thing, because the question itself was the right shape. A man still working for Lark would have asked what she wanted or what she was offering. A man who had already decided something asked what she needed. She picked up her own coffee. "I need you to make sure Quint and the boy don't do anything in the next 4 days that can't be undone, and Lark won't be here until day 6. He'll want to be present for what he thinks is the resolution. He'll ride out personally. He always has. Cord considered this. You know his habits. I know everything about Gideon Lark, she said. I've had 5 years. He set down the cup. Stood, put his hat back on. Stood at the door a moment, hand on the frame, not quite looking back at her. There was a woman in the courtroom in Santa Fe, he said. April, 1871. Sitting at the clerk's table. When the withdrawal notice came in and the case started to fall apart, every other person in that room looked at the judge or at the defense. She was the only one who kept writing. A pause. I always wondered, he said, if she got it all down. He opened the door. The night outside was cold and very dark, and the barn light was still on, and somewhere out in the juniper a night bird was doing whatever night birds do at 10 o'clock in October in the high desert. She got it all down, Vera said. He walked out into the dark. She closed the door, sat back at the table, opened her notebook. Day 1, she wrote. Cord may be useful. Quint is dangerous the way careful men are dangerous. He will find things. Besh is still deciding who he is. That may matter more than either of the others. She paused. 7 days. She put the pen down, looked at the window. Outside, the Cimarron Valley was dark and still and cold, and the 3 riders who had come up the road that morning were settling in for the night in her barn, and Gideon Lark was, she estimated, eating supper in Ridgeback and feeling confident. She let him feel confident. There was time. Not much enoughs. She blew out the lamp and went to bed, and slept better than she had in weeks. The sleep of a person who has been waiting a very long time for something to start, and has finally, that morning, watched it begin. Day 2 began the way Day 1 had ended, quickly. Which was the part that made it dangerous? Vera had learned, in 11 years of working with documents and the men who created them, that noise was rarely the signal worth tracking. Noise was what happened when someone wanted you looking in a particular direction. Quiet was what happened when someone was actually moving. Silas Quint was very quiet on Day 2. She watched him from the kitchen window at first light. He was out before the other 2, walking the perimeter of the property, with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. Not the walk of a man stretching his legs, the walk of a man constructing something. Building a mental map using measurements he was taking silently in his head, the way a skilled man does when he has been somewhere. Long enough to stop reacting and start assessing. He stopped at the east fence line, stood there a while. Then he walked back toward the barn, and she watched the line of his shoulders and thought, he found the creek reference in the county records in Ridgeback. He knows about the water. He's trying to understand why a creek that small would be worth the effort Lark is making. He doesn't know yet that it isn't about the water. She poured her coffee, went to the stove, made enough biscuits for 5 people, which was more than she needed, but she had found, over 50-some years of living among human beings, that food was the most reliable instrument of observation she possessed. You put food on a table and watched who ate easily, and who ate carefully, and who didn't eat at all. You learned more from that than from 3 conversations. She put the biscuits on the table and went to the barn door. Breakfast, she said. Then she went back inside and sat down and waited to see who came in what order. Darrow Besh came first. That was interesting, not because it suggested eagerness. He had the careful walk of a young man trying not to seem eager, which was a different thing entirely. He came first because he had been awake since before Quint's perimeter walk. And she knew that because she had been awake since before that, and at 4:30 in the morning she had heard someone moving in the barn. Not restlessly, deliberately, the movement of a person who has something on their mind and has decided that lying still is not going to resolve it. He sat at the table, looked at the biscuits, looked at her. Go ahead, she said. He took 2, started eating. Kept his eyes down the way young men do when they have something to say and haven't yet worked out if they're going to say it. She waited. Cord came in next, acknowledged the biscuits with a nod. Poured his own coffee without asking, which meant he had spent enough nights in enough kitchens that the etiquette of it was automatic. He sat at the opposite end of the table from Besh and picked up a biscuit and looked out the window at the same fence line. Quint had been studying. Quint came last. He came in, looked at the table, looked at the 3 of them, and sat in the remaining chair with the posture of a man who is sitting because standing would be conspicuous, not because he wants to be sitting. He had his satchel. He set it beside his chair. He did not take a biscuit immediately, which was exactly what she had expected. "There's a second set of land records," Quint said. To the room, to no one in particular. The opening of a man who is beginning an inquiry without revealing how far along the inquiry he has already traveled. "I know that," she said. "The filing references a prior claim registered under the Surveyor General's office. Not the territorial court." He paused. "I've seen similar filings before. Mexican period grants carried forward after the Gadsden Purchase." "Have you?" she said. "Most of them have been invalidated. The Court of Private Land Claims has been working through them for years. That court was established to handle claims where there is a legal dispute about validity," she said. "Claims where validity is not in dispute don't require adjudication." Quint was quiet a moment. "Is your claim in dispute?" he said. "Not until Mr. Lark decided it was," she said. She picked up her coffee, drank. Across the table, Cord was still looking out the window. Besh had finished his biscuits and was looking at her with something she couldn't entirely read. Not suspicion. Something more alert than suspicion. Like an animal that has heard a sound and is trying to determine whether it matters. She would think about that later. Quint finally reached over and took a biscuit. Ate it with a thoughtful expression. A man who has been given a piece of information and is trying to fit it into a structure he was already building before he arrived. He rode to Ridgeback after breakfast. She had expected that too. She watched Quint ride south and then went to the woodpile and spent an hour splitting logs, which her back had opinions about, which she found clarifying in a way that few things were, the physical resistance of it, the requirement to be entirely present for each stroke, to read the grain of the wood correctly, to commit to the angle before the axe fell. There was no room in that work for the peripheral anxiety that gathered at the edges of a mind when large things were in motion, and not all of them under your control. She could control the axe. She split a winter's worth. Stacked it. Went inside and washed her hands and thought about Jonas. 5 years was long enough that she had stopped dreaming about him. That had taken almost 3 years. The dreams had not been nightmares, which in some ways made them harder. They had been ordinary. Kitchen dreams, field dreams. Jonas coming in from outside and setting his hat on the hook by the door and saying something unremarkable, and she would feel the ease of a body that has long shared space with another body and knows where it will be. And then she would wake up, and the hook by the door would have only her hat on it. Those dreams had been harder than nightmares would have been. Now she mostly thought about him when her hands were busy with something he had built or repaired or planted. The woodpile was his. He had designed the stacking structure. Alternating layers, tilted slightly toward center for stability. She had initially argued it was unnecessary. She had eventually come to understand it was simply better. She used his system. She thought about the fall of 1879. She had not been here that year. She had been in Taos 6 months, helping a woman named Dorset Hale settle a title dispute on property her late husband had filed incorrectly. Vera had done it as a favor, not for pay. She had the knowledge, and Dorset Hale had needed it, which was reason enough. Jonas had been alone on the property for those 6 months. She had come back in November. He had been different, not in any way she could have named clearly at the time. Quieter, maybe. More careful around the edges, the way a man becomes careful when he has been near something frightening and isn't sure how to talk about it. She had assumed it was the loneliness of 6 months without company. Jonas needed company infrequently but genuinely, and 6 months without it could leave a mark. It was only after he died that she went back through that year. Really went back through it. The way she would go back through a document that had seemed ordinary on first reading, and then turned out to contain something she had missed. The soil on the north side of the barn. She had noticed it in the spring of 1880, March maybe, or early April. A section of ground that had settled differently from the surrounding earth. Not dramatically, subtly. The kind of thing you only noticed if you had been looking at that same patch of ground for years, and had a good eye for the way earth behaves when it has been disturbed and left to resettle. She had noticed it, and she had thought, Jonas must have done some digging there over the winter. Drainage work, maybe. And she had not thought about it again until Jonas was dead, and then she had thought about it a great deal. She had not dug it up. That was a deliberate decision, made carefully, over several nights in the first winter after Jonas was gone. She had weighed what she might find against what she could do with it, and against what the finding might cost her, and she had concluded that leaving it where it was served her better than disturbing it. The soil remembered. The soil always remembered. When the time came, the soil's memory would be enough. She just had to make sure the right people were present when it spoke. Cord found her in the vegetable garden that afternoon. She was putting the beds to sleep for winter, clearing out the spent tomato plants, turning the soil, working in a layer of compost from the pile behind the barn. Work that didn't need doing urgently, but that satisfied the part of her that required things to be prepared correctly before they were left. He came around the side of the house and stopped at the garden gate without opening it. "Quint rode to Ridgeback," he said. "I know. He's going to send a wire to Lark." "I know that too." Cord leaned on the gatepost, watched her work. "The boy's been in the barn since after breakfast," he said. "Not eating, not sleeping. What's he doing?" Thinking, from the look of it, she turned over a section of soil, found a late earthworm. "Left it. He's been here before," Cord said. "Not this property, this situation. Men doing work for money and finding out partway through that the work isn't what they were told, has he? He's young enough that he still minds," Cord said. "That won't last. But right now he still minds." She stood up straight and looked at Cord across the garden. "Are you telling me to talk to him?" she said. "I'm telling you what I observed." She considered this. Then she set her trowel on the fence post and took off her work gloves and walked to the barn. Darrow Besh was sitting on a hay bale, elbows on his knees, hat in his hands, doing what Cord had described, thinking. The heavy, unmoving quality of a young man whose thinking has outrun his previous certainties and hasn't yet found new ones to stand on. She came in and sat on the hay bale on the other side of the center post. Not close. Not in the chair that would have felt like an authority position. Just sat down the way you sit near someone who needs to talk and might be more likely to do it if you don't make talking feel like an event. The barn smelled the way barns do. Horse and hay and old wood and the faint mineral edge of cold air moving through the boards. Her horse, Brindle, looked over the stall door at Besh with the detached attention of a creature that has been observing human beings for years and hasn't formed a high opinion of the experience. A minute passed. Maybe two. Then Besh said, "He told us it was a land dispute, Mr. Lark. Said you were a widow who'd been letting the claim lapse. Said the water rights had reverted to county management, and he was just formalizing something already legally settled." He turned the hat in his hands. "Slow rotation. Said we were there to serve the notice and make sure you understood the situation." "Do you believe that now?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. Which was honest. "I don't know what I believe," he said. "I know there's something here that Lark wants badly enough to pay 3 men and a lawyer for, and land doesn't usually make a man that determined. Land is land. Water's better, but still." He looked up. "What is it?" he said. "What's actually here?" She looked at him for a moment, young. Not so young he hadn't seen things. Old enough that what he'd seen had started to accumulate into something that gave him trouble sleeping. She recognized that age. She had been that age once, a long time ago, and she remembered the quality of the trouble that came with it. The discovery that the world was less organized around fairness than you had been led to expect. The problem of not yet knowing what to do with that discovery. "There's a man buried in the north field," she said. Besh went very still. "Behind the barn," she said. "Left side of the drainage culvert. About 4 feet down. Approximately 8 feet post. He has been there since late 1879. The barn was very quiet." Brindle blew air through her nose. "Who is he?" Besh said. His voice went careful. The way a man sounds when he is walking across ice and testing each step before committing his weight. "I don't know his name," she said. "I believe he was one of Lark's men. I believe he was sent to this property to do something, remove a document, frighten Jonas, perhaps more than that, and something went wrong. Jonas Cull, my husband. What happened to him?" "I don't know exactly what happened in the barn," she said. "I wasn't here. I was in Taos. I came back in November. Jonas was different. And in the spring I noticed the soil on the north side had been disturbed." Besh was looking at her steadily. "Jonas died 8 months later," she said, "in the south field. The official report said his foot got caught in the plow trace and the blade came back on him." She paused. Jonas had been plowing that field since 1872. He knew every inch of it. Silence. Lark doesn't want this land because of the water, she said. He wants it because there is a man buried on it who can connect him to things he has spent 6 years making sure stayed unconnected. Besh was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she waited him out. If I ride back to Lark, he said, tell him what you just told me. Yes, she said, and if I stay, that's a different calculation, she said. One you'll have to make yourself. He looked at the hat in his hands, at the slow rotation of it. Then stopped the rotation. Does Cord know, he said. Cord knows what he needs to know for now. Does he know about the... Not yet. There's an order to things. He'll know when it matters. Besh looked up at her. For a moment he looked exactly his age. Not old enough to be tired, but old enough to understand what being tired eventually meant. Who are you, he said. Not aggressively. Genuinely. The question of a man who has arrived somewhere and found the terrain entirely different from every map he was given. She stood up, brushed the hay off her skirt. I'm the woman who has lived on this land for 13 years, she said. I'm the widow of Jonas Cull, who was a decent man who deserved considerably more years than he got. And I'm the person who has been waiting for 5 years, for exactly this week. She walked toward the barn door. Stopped, Mr. Besh, she said. He looked up, the north side of the barn. Don't go near it. She walked out into the afternoon. Quint came back from Ridgeback at dusk. She watched him ride in from the kitchen window. He had the posture of a man who has confirmed something he suspected and is now reassessing its implications. Not worried exactly. Recalibrating. He put his horse up, came to the house, knocked. She opened the door. Mr. Lark will be here on day 6, he said. He's bringing Edmund Wace. I know who Mr. Wace is, she said. He'll have an additional filing from the territorial court. And I'll have had time to look into the second registration. You'll need to go to Santa Fe for the original, she said. He looked at her. I know. I'm riding out tomorrow morning, he said it flatly. Not as information, as a test. To see if the prospect of him finding the original document alarmed her. She looked back at him with the same flatness. I'll have coffee on at 5, she said. If you want it before you ride. He almost smiled. Not quite. He went back to the barn. She closed the door. Stood for a moment with her hands flat on the table. Santa Fe was 2 days' ride. He would leave tomorrow and arrive the following evening. The land office would be accessible the morning of day 4. He would spend day 4 in the records. He would ride back on day 5 and arrive the same evening. Lark would be arriving in Ridgeback. They would come together on day 6. She had known it would be this way. She went to the shelf and took down the third ledger from the left. Opened it to the page she had marked with a strip of leather 11 years ago and never moved. The page contained a single entry in her own clerk's notation. Precise, small, designed for legibility above all else. Land grant claim, prior registration. Surveyor General Reference, NM 1869 PG 441. Claimant V. Harrow, V. Harrow. Her name before she became Vera Cull, before she was anyone's wife, before she was anyone's widow. She had filed it under her birth name, which no one in Cimarron Valley knew, because she had not used it here. She was Vera Cull in this valley. She had been Vera Cull for 13 years. The woman who had walked into the Surveyor General's office in 1869 and filed a claim on land she had not yet seen except on a survey map was Vera Harrow, age 31, single, employed by the federal government, with the legal standing to file and the documentation to support it. Quint would find the reference number. He would pull the original registration. He would read the name. And then he would have to figure out who V. Harrow was. She had 3 days before that happened. 3 days in which the men in her barn did not yet know that the ground beneath their feet had been legally registered to her before any of them had arrived in New Mexico territory, before Gideon Lark had decided the Cimarron Valley was his to reshape, before Edmund Wace had drafted a single fraudulent document. 3 days, she put the ledger back, went to bed. Day 3. Quint rode south before dawn. She heard him leave, did not get up. Lay in the dark and listened to his horse's hooves on the dirt road, diminishing southward until there was nothing but the wind and the silence of 3 in the morning, which is different from all other silences, because it is the silence of a world that has not yet decided to begin again. She slept till 6, got up, made coffee, walked out to the north side of the barn. She did this approximately once a month, had been doing it for 4 years, not to disturb anything, not to mark the spot or memorialize it. Simply to stand there and look at the ground and remind herself of what was underneath it, and why it mattered and what it meant that she had not moved it and was not going to, was instead going to bring the people to it rather than the other way around. The soil had settled evenly now. 4 years of weather and season change. An uninformed eye would see nothing. Even a moderately informed eye would see nothing. But Vera had looked at this particular section of ground in every season, in every light, in every weather for 4 years, and she knew its slight depression the way you know the face of someone you have been looking at for a long time. The way absence leaves a shape. She stood there a few minutes, thought about Jonas, who had stood somewhere on this property in the fall of 1879, and made a decision about what to do with a dead man, and had chosen the only thing a person alone on a frontier property can do with something like that. Put it in the ground and keep it there and carry the weight of it alone. She wished she had been here, not because she could have done anything differently. She wasn't sure she could have. But because Jonas had carried it alone for 8 months. Through the winter and into the spring and into the last summer of his life. Had gone to his death with it still inside him, she would have helped him carry it. That was the kind of marriage they had, not dramatic. Not passionate in the way of young people who mistake intensity for depth. Something quieter. The kind of marriage where you know without asking that the other person is carrying something, and you pull a little more of your own weight to give them room to carry it, and then one day you ask, and they tell you, and you sit with it together until it becomes less heavy. They had not had time for that. She turned and walked back to the house. Cord was waiting on the porch. He had 2 cups and handed her one without asking. She took it. They sat in the chairs Jonas had made. Sturdy, low-backed, with the slight forward lean of furniture made by a man who worked outdoors, and knew that when you sat down, you were usually watching something in the middle distance. "Quint's going to Santa Fe," Cord said. "He left this morning. He'll find the registration, yes, and the name on it won't be Cull." She looked at him. He looked back. "You've been thinking," she said. "I've had 3 days to think. What did you arrive at?" He drank his coffee, set the cup on the porch rail. 11 years in the Surveyor General's office, he said. "You left 1871. You filed a claim in 1869, 2 years before you left. The name on the registration is your name from before Cull." He paused. "What name?" She considered how much of this to give him. "Harrow," she said. "Vera Harrow." He turned that over. "The filing is valid," he said. "Not a question. Completely, correctly, and irrevocably valid," she said. "I filed it under federal jurisdiction because I understood in 1869 that territorial jurisdiction in New Mexico was unstable. I filed it under the Surveyor General's authority because that registration exists in a system that predates territorial court structure in this area and is not subject to it. So when Lark's lawyers file in the territorial court, they are filing in the wrong court," she said. "They are contesting a claim that does not exist within their jurisdiction." "Does Wace know this?" Cord said. "Wace is a territorial lawyer, excellent at it. But his expertise is in the territorial system. The prior grant registration exists outside that system, in federal land office records that were not maintained in the territorial courthouse. He will not have known to look for it." Cord looked out at the valley. A hawk was making slow circles above the juniper stand to the east. Patient, economical, the kind of flying that wastes nothing. "You've been sitting on this for years," he said. 4 years, since I understood fully what Lark was doing. The first year after Jonas and I was. Not ready, but now Lark has brought his people to my property. He has filed fraudulent documents in a territorial court. He has given me 7 days, which is exactly the time I needed, and he has sent a careful man to look at my records, which means a careful man is currently riding towards Santa Fe to find documentation that will confirm everything I need confirmed." She drank her coffee. "Quint is doing my work for me," she said. Cord looked at her for a long moment. "You've been waiting for Lark to overreach," he said. "I've been waiting for Lark to make it formal," she said. "He's been applying informal pressure for 3 years, blocking water access, paying people in Ridgeback to make things difficult, small things, deniable things. What he did this week is the first thing he's done that is on record. That has his name attached to it." She paused. "That I can use," she said. The man in the north field, Cord said. She went still. Besh told you, she said. Besh didn't have to tell me, Cord said. I walked that section of ground this morning. I've been around enough disturbed earth to know what it looks like. She looked at him. You were going to tell me, he said. Not an accusation. Yes? When it was time, is it time now? She thought about it. Outside, the hawk made another circle, wide, unhurried, not hunting yet. Watching, what I know, she said, is that Jonas buried someone on this property in the fall of 1879. I believe the man was sent by Lark. I believe Jonah acted in defense of himself or the property, and that in the absence of any legal recourse, because Lark owned the relevant authorities at the time, he made the only decision available to him, and it left him carrying something very heavy for the remaining months of his life. You never dug it up. No. Why? She looked at the juniper stand. Because what's in that ground is not evidence of a crime by Jonas. It is evidence of a pattern of conduct by Gideon Lark. A pattern that includes what happened there in 1879, and what happened to Jonas in 1880, and what is happening on this porch right now. A pattern that becomes significant only when it is complete. She paused. You don't use evidence piecemeal. You build a case. You wait until the case is whole, and then you present it all at once, in a context where it cannot be dismissed. Cord looked at her for a long time. Harlow Finn. He said, he's been in Ridgeback for 3 weeks, and you've told him, I've given him what he needs to write a story. What's in that field will be for the law to determine. Once the story is in print and the context is established and Lark cannot manage it by making a call to a territorial judge, Lark will say Jonas killed an innocent man. Lark is welcome to say whatever he likes. By the time he says it, the Santa Fe Daily New Mexican will have already said considerably more. Cord picked up his coffee cup. Found it empty. Set it down, Vera, he said. She looked at him. You've been alone on this property for 5 years, he said. I have, and in those 5 years you've been building this alone. No law, no marshal, no one official, no one official in this territory could be trusted, she said. You know that better than I do. He was quiet. So you did it yourself, he said. I did what I know how to do, she said. I made records. I organized evidence. I established the correct legal filing. And I waited for the moment when Lark would do something definitive enough that the record would have something to attach to. She stood up, picked up the empty cups, and now he has, she said. So we're almost done. She went inside. Day 4. Quint was in Santa Fe. She spent the morning going through the papers one last time. Not because she needed to review them. She knew them entirely, had known them for years. But because laying them out in order was a kind of preparation, the way a craftsman sets out his tools before a job. Not to check that they are present, to remind his hands of their weight and purpose. The registration. Reference NM 1869 PG 441. 4 pages. Federal format. Correct in every particular. The cross-reference she had included on Jonas's 1872 homestead filing. A number that Quint would find in Santa Fe. That would lead him to the registration. That would lead him to the name V. Harrow. The letter she had sent to Harlow Finn. The outline of everything. Not a statement of evidence. That was for lawyers. A story. The story of a piece of land and a dead man and a husband and a cattle baron and a forged document delivered by 3 men on horseback. The kind of story that sold papers in every town in the territory. The private notebook. 11 years of entries from the Surveyor General's office. 14 more years since. Dates, names, descriptions. The withdrawal notice in the Hollis case. The color of the suit. The ring on the right hand. The delivery without a signature, everything. She closed the last folder, tied the leather cord around it, put it back in the box under the floorboard. She went out to feed the chickens. Darrow Besh was at the south fence when she came out, leaning on the top rail, looking toward the Ridgeback Road, the way a man looks when he is deciding whether to ride down that road or stay where he is. She recognized the posture. She had seen it in Santa Fe. In the faces of men who had come in with documents they were not sure they wanted to file. The moment before commitment. When turning around was still technically possible, she crossed the yard and stopped beside him. He did not look at her. You could ride south, she said. No one's asked you to stay. Cord asked me to stay. Cord suggested it. That's different. He was quiet. If I ride south, I go back to Lark, he said. Yes. And Lark sends someone else, eventually. And whatever happens on day 6 happens without. He stopped. Without you knowing how it ends, she said. A pause. Yeah, he said. She leaned on the fence beside him, looked south. The road ran straight and pale and empty. I've been in this territory 6 months, he said. Before that, Texas. Before that, Colorado. He turned the hat brim in his hands. The same rotation she had noticed on day 1. I've done what Lark's paying me to do 6, 7 times. Different names, different properties. The same. Man who wants something, someone in the way, money to make the person in the way decide it's not worth the trouble. He paused. It always worked before, he said. People decide it's not worth the trouble. Most people can't afford for it to be worth the trouble, she said. But you can. She looked at him. Mr. Besh, she said. I am a 62-year-old woman with 160 acres of dry land, and a horse that has opinions about everything. What I have is not money. What I have is time I have already spent, and records I have already made, and a story that is already written. The spending and the making and the writing are done. Whether I stand here or ride away, what I've done is done. He looked at her. Then why does it matter what I do, he said. She thought about that honestly. It doesn't, she says, not to the outcome. The outcome is already. She paused. What it matters to is what you do after this week, which isn't my business. But you asked. He turned back to the road. Was quiet for a long moment then. Is there anything you need me to do? She considered. On day 6, she said, when Lark arrives, and Quint has what he found in Santa Fe and Wace has his filing. There may be a moment when things could go in a direction that would be difficult to walk back. Cord, he said. Cord will manage himself. It's you I'm less certain about. He looked at her. Not because I doubt your judgment, she said. Because you're young enough to still have the reaction time. He almost smiled. Very almost. What do you need me to do? He said again. Stand where I can see you, she said. And don't do anything fast. She pushed off the fence and walked back toward the house. Day 5. Quint did not return by nightfall, which meant he had found something that required more time. Either the registration had led him to additional records, or he had found V. Harrow in the index, and was trying to determine who V. Harrow was before coming back. Any of those possibilities were acceptable. She sat at the kitchen table, after dark, with her notebook open. Cord knocked at 9. He came in and sat and accepted the coffee she poured and looked at her with the steady, careful attention he had been directing at her since day 1. Quint didn't come back, he said. No, he found the registration, yes. And then he found the name, V. Harrow, he said. He'll ask in the land office. They'll tell him the registrant was a woman employed in the Surveyor General's office in 1869, that the registration is valid and complete and correctly cross-referenced to a homestead filing in 1872. She paused. At some point he'll understand that a woman who worked in that office in 1869 and filed a prior claim on land that eventually became the Cull property is likely the same woman currently sitting in the Cull kitchen. And then he'll come back. He'll come back the same time Lark arrives. That's what the wire he sent on day 3 would have arranged. Come back with what you find. Come back when I'm there, Cord nodded. Looked at his coffee. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, he drank. Set the cup down. Vera, he said. She waited. When this is over, he said. When Lark has the newspaper in his hand and Wace has nothing left to file, he stopped. Started again. What do you do? She thought about it. I fix the fence on the east side. I've been putting it off a month. I plant the winter rye in the barn and check the roof again after the next wind and ride into Ridgeback once a week, the way I always have. He looked at her. That's all, he said. That's everything, she said. He was quiet a moment. Then he stood and put on his hat and went to the door, paused there. The same pause as 2 nights ago, the hand on the frame, in Santa Fe, he said, in 1871. After the deposition was withdrawn and the case fell apart. After it was over and the courtroom cleared out, he was speaking to the door. I stayed in that room for a while. I didn't know what to do next. I looked over at the clerk's table and you were still there. Still writing. She did not say anything. I didn't introduce myself, he said. I should have, but I didn't know what I would have said. He opened the door. Good night, he said. He walked out into the dark. She sat at the table for a long time after he left. Not writing, just sitting with the lamp and the notebook and the quiet weight of the 5th day settling around her. Even and slow and thorough. She opened the notebook, wrote, Day 5. Quint is still in Santa Fe. Cord is ready. Besh has decided. Tomorrow everything that has been in motion for 5 years arrives at the same place at the same time. She paused dead. Jonas would have said it was about time. She smiled. Very small. Very private, blew out the lamp. She was up at 4, not because she had slept badly, because she had slept well, completely. The deep, flat sleep of a body that understands the waiting is over and has decided to rest before the work begins. She woke clean, no fog. No slow return to consciousness. Dark room. Cold air. The sound of wind through the juniper. And today, she built the fire, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the dark with both hands around the cup, and went through the order of things one more time. Not the documents, not the plan. She had been through those enough times that going through them again would be repetition without purpose. What she went through was the sequence. The choreography of a day she had been arranging in the abstract for 4 years, and that was now going to happen in the actual, which was always different from the abstract in ways you could not entirely predict. Lark would arrive mid-morning, not at dawn, which would have been the practical choice, mid-morning. The hour of a man who wanted to arrive after others had been waiting long enough to feel it. Gideon Lark had built his entire reputation on making people wait in the cold while he rode in from the warm. Wace would be with him. Edmunds never went into a situation without Lark, and never let Lark go into one without him. 2 decades of shared interest had made them the kind of unit that was difficult to address separately. Quint would come from the south. He would have spent the ride from Santa Fe, organizing what he had found into the sequence Lark would need. Quint was meticulous about sequence. Cord would be in the barn. Besh would be where she had told him to be, where she could see him. And Harlow Fenn, she thought about Harlow Fenn. 23 days in the Ridgeback rooming house. 3 weeks of waiting on the word of a woman he had known 6 years and trusted because she had never once given him information that turned out to be wrong. She hoped the rooming house had decent food. She hoped he had brought enough paper. She drank her coffee. Outside, the dark was beginning to go gray at the eastern edge. Not light yet. The preliminary conversation between night and morning that happens before either commits to anything. She went to the shelf, took down the box, opened it, laid everything on the table in the order she would need it. The registration first. NM 1869 PG 441. 4 pages, clean and complete, in the federal format she had spent 11 years using until it was as familiar as her own handwriting. Because it was her own handwriting. She had written this document as both registrant and recording clerk, which had been technically irregular, and which she had noted in the margin in the notation format, the office used for exactly such circumstances. The notation made it more legitimate, not less. It was the kind of thing only someone who had worked in that office would know to do. The cross-reference number. The homestead filing from 1872, Jonas's name, with the cross-reference in the bottom left corner, where she had placed it deliberately, precisely, knowing that the day might come when someone would need to find it. The private notebook. She had considered leaving it inside. It was the most personal of the documents, the one that contained not just dates and names but observations. Her own thoughts written down over 14 years in the shorthand of a woman who had been trained to be precise but had never, in the private record, needed to be anything other than honest. She left it on the table. Then she went to the back room and took the folded newspaper from under the mattress. She had been keeping it there for 3 days, since Nettie Pruitt had ridden up on the afternoon of day 3 with a package wrapped in brown paper and the expression of a woman who has just done something she is quietly proud of and is not going to make a production about. Inside the package, 6 copies of the Santa Fe Daily New Mexican, that morning's edition. Dated October 14, 1885, 1 below the fold. Column 3. She had read it 3 times on day 3 and had not needed to read it since because she had it by memory. The whole of it sitting organized and still inside her like a room she had arranged long ago and could walk through in the dark. Harlow Fenn had written it exactly as she had hoped. Thorough. Specific. The kind of reporting that names names and gives dates and attributes everything attributable and cites the records that exist to be cited. He had written about Gideon Lark and Edmund Wace and the pattern of land acquisitions in Cimarron Valley over 8 years. He had written about the forged filing in the territorial court. He had written about a widow on a ridge who had been working in the Surveyor General's office when a case against Lark had been dismissed under irregular circumstances in 1871. He had written about Jonas Cull and the manner of his death, and the questions that death raised in the context of everything else. He had not written about the North Field. She had not told him about the North Field. That was for the law, when the law came. And the law would come now because the paper was out. Because you could manage a territorial judge, and you could manage a local marshal, and you could manage the political architecture of a territory that still ran on the personal relationships between men who owed each other things. But you could not manage a newspaper. You could not reach into a printing press and pull a story back out of it. You could not undeliver papers already in the hands of subscribers across the territory. Gideon Lark could send a rider to stop almost anything. He could not send a rider fast enough to stop this. She set the paper on the table with the other documents, looked at the arrangement of it, thought. Jonas said, "It's today." The kitchen did not respond, which was fine. She was not asking it to. She went to get dressed. Cord came in from the barn at 6. He stopped when he saw the table. The documents laid out in order. The newspaper on the right side, face up, headline visible. He stood there, read the headline, looked up at her. She was at the stove turning eggs in the pan, and she did not look back at him because she was watching the eggs. "You've had that for 3 days, he said. "Nettie brought it on day 3, and you didn't." "No," he came to the table, stood over the newspaper. "Read the first paragraph." She heard the stillness that comes over a person when they are reading something that is reorganizing how they understand the preceding days. Harlow, Finn. He said, "He's been in Ridgeback since before you arrived. He's been waiting 3 weeks, he has." A pause. "For this day?" Cord said. "Yes." She slid the eggs onto a plate, put it on the table beside the documents, poured his coffee, sat down. He sat, did not eat immediately. Read more of the paper. Then looked up. "Lark will see this when he gets to Ridgeback," he said. "He may already have seen it. It would have reached Ridgeback yesterday, and he's still coming. He has to come," she said. "If he turns around now, it looks like exactly what it is. He has to come here and try to manage it and hope that his lawyer and his territorial connections are enough too." "They're not," Cord said. "No, they're not. But he has to try. Men like Gideon Lark have always been able to try their way out of things. He won't believe, until he's standing in this yard with the paper in his hand, that this time trying won't be enough." Cord looked at her across the table. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "Stand behind me," she said. "Don't say anything unless I ask you to. Don't touch your gun unless someone else moves first. And if someone moves first, make sure it's not Besh who reacts. Besh won't. You're more certain of him than I am." "I've been watching him for 6 days, Cord said. "He made his decision on day 3. Whatever he decided in the barn, it wasn't to keep working for Lark." She thought about Darrow Besh in the barn, the hat, the rotation of it, the stillness when she told him about the North Field. "All right," she said. She ate. He ate. Neither of them spoke again until they heard hoofbeats on the road. Quint came first, from the south, which meant he had ridden through the night. His horse was tired. He was not. He had the rigid alertness of a man who has been awake 20 hours' strength of what he found, and is still running on it. He came through the gate alone, tied his horse, looked at the porch where Vera was standing. He had the satchel. Of course he had the satchel, and he had something else. She could see it in the set of his face, the slight compression of his mouth, the look of a man who went to find a piece of information and found considerably more than he expected, and is now determining what it means that he found it. He came up to the porch, stopped at the base of the steps. "V. Harrow," he said. "Yes," she said. "A beat. You filed the registration in 1869. "I did. While you were working in the office, I was entitled to file," she said. "I was a single woman over the age of 21, employed by the federal government. The Homestead Act required head of household status. The prior grant registration did not. There was no conflict of interest because I was registering under a different legal framework entirely." He looked at her. "You cross-referenced it to the 1872 Homestead filing." "Yes. So when Jonas Cull filed under the Homestead Act, it created a second chain of title on the same property," she said, "which is irregular, which is why I added the cross-reference. To make explicit that the two claims related to the same parcel, and that the prior registration should govern in any question of underlying title. Quint was quiet. Behind him, on the road, a second group of riders appeared. Gideon Lark, Edmund Wace. 2 additional men riding behind, not gunmen, dressed like functionaries, the kind of men who carry things for other men and write down what is said. And behind them, at a respectful distance that was its own statement about his relationship to the proceedings, Harlowfen. On a brown horse, notebook already open on the saddle horn, Gideon Lark was a large man. She had known that from Nettie's descriptions and from the records she had studied, but records do not fully convey the quality of physical mass that some carry as an argument. He was broad through the chest and moved with the deliberate economy of a man who has always been bigger than the people around him and has learned to use that slowness as theater. He rode a gray horse, well-fed, well-kept. The horse of a man who understood that the condition of what you owned communicated something about you. He, dismounted, did not tie his horse. One of the functionaries did it. He walked toward the porch and stopped in the yard, not at the steps, looking up at her. His face was the face of a man who had read that morning's paper and was containing something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but was in the vicinity of both. Edmund stepped up beside him. Smaller, thinner, the kind of thin that comes not from deprivation, but from the metabolism of a man always running calculations. He had a leather case under his arm, newer than Quint's satchel. More expensive. Silas Quint stepped aside, not far, but to the side, not beside Lark. Not beside Vera, somewhere in between, which was, she thought, the first honest position he had taken all week. Mrs. Cull, Lark said. His voice was the voice she had expected, low, controlled. The voice of a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where the person who spoke most quietly was the one everyone listened to. Mr. Lark, she said, I expect you've seen the paper. I have. Then you know this morning's journalism is going to create some complications. For you, she said. A pause. For everyone involved, he said, including you. She looked at him, big man. Gray horse, expensive lawyer. 2 extra men who wrote things down. And behind him at the gate, Harlowfen on his brown horse with his notebook on the saddle horn. Mr. Lark, she said, I'd like you to look at something. She said inside, came back with the documents. All of them. The registration, the homestead cross-reference, the private notebook, and the newspaper. Folded to column 3 with the headline visible. She held them out, not to Lark, to Wace. Because Wace was the one who would understand them. And Lark needed to see Wace understand them. That was the order of things. Wace took the documents with the careful handling of a man who has been given papers he expects to contest. He looked at the registration first, read the first page, turned to the second. His face did not change expression, but something behind his eyes made a very small adjustment. Like a door closing quietly in a back room. He turned to the cross-reference. Read it. Looked up at Vera. This is a federal registration, he said. Filed under the authority of the U.S. Surveyor General's office. Yes, in 1869, yes. He turned to the 3rd page. Read the margin notation. The one she had made in the irregular circumstances format. His lips moved very slightly as he read it. Not reading aloud. The unconscious movement of a man whose reading and his lips still had a relationship. He stopped, turned back to page 1, then he looked at Lark, and Vera saw, in that exchange of looks, something she had been waiting to see for 4 years. The look of a man telling another man without words that the ground they had been standing on was not the ground they thought it was. The careful man telling the overconfident man, we may have miscalculated. Lark looked back at Wace steadily. Well, he said, the prior registration is valid, Wace said. His voice was even, professional. The voice of a man delivering information he wishes were different. It predates the Homestead Act's application to this district. It was filed under federal authority. Our territorial court filing does not have jurisdiction to contest it. There has to be. The filing is in the Surveyor General's archive, Wace said. It is cross-referenced correctly to the subsequent homestead claim. There is a margin notation addressing the irregular dual-title circumstance that is, frankly, more procedurally thorough than most things I have seen from that office. He paused. She wrote it herself. She was the recording clerk. Silence. Lark looked at Vera. Vera looked back. So, she said, the territorial court filing Mr. Wace prepared, which was based on a forged signature, which Mr. Quint can confirm, is not only fraudulent but also filed in the wrong jurisdiction to contest my title even if it had been legitimate. Nobody said anything, which means, she said, that you rode out here this morning, with your lawyer and your men and your 7 days, to contest a claim that you cannot contest in the court you chose, using a document that is demonstrably forged. She looked at Wace. I'm not a lawyer, she said, but I believe that constitutes filing false documents in a territorial court, which is a criminal matter. Wace was looking at the ground, a precise examination of the ground, the examination of a man counting the distance between where he is and where he should have been more careful. Lark had not moved. Big man, still man. The stillness was different now from how it had been when he arrived. When he arrived, it was the stillness of authority. Now it was the stillness of a man determining how much of this is as bad as it looks and whether any of it is recoverable. The newspaper article, he said, was written by Harlow Fenn, she said, who is at this moment standing at my gate. He's been in Ridgeback for 3 weeks. I contacted him before you sent your men out here. She paused. Before you sent anyone out here, Mr. Lark. I knew this was coming. I had time. Lark looked at the gate, looked at Harlow Fenn. Fenn raised 2 fingers from the saddle horn. Not a wave, an acknowledgement. The article doesn't say anything that can be proven, Lark said. The article says what I told him, she said. What can be proven I proved in court documents and land registrations. The article provides the context. Context isn't evidence. Context is what makes evidence readable, she said. I spent 11 years in a records office watching evidence be used without context, and I watched what happened to it. Evidence without context can be managed. Evidence inside a story that 5,000 people in this territory are reading this morning is considerably harder to manage. Lark's jaw moved. Once, twice, the same motion she had seen on Cord's face on the first night. Except Cord's jaw had moved like a man tasting something he was deciding to swallow. Lark's moved like a man tasting something he could not spit out and could not swallow either. Just had to hold it there. What do you want? He said. Just like that. The question that meant everything, because it meant he had already moved past contesting the situation. He was in the next phase. The phase where men like Gideon Lark begin calculating cost and looking for a number that makes the problem disappear. She had known this was coming. She had thought carefully about how to answer it. I want this property to remain mine without further interference, she said. I want the fraudulent territorial court filing withdrawn. I want a written statement from Mr. Wace acknowledging the filing was in error. She paused. And I want, in that statement, a clear and documented acknowledgement that Gideon Lark has no claim, legal or otherwise, on this land or on any water rights associated with it. Lark looked at her. That's all, he said. That is everything, she said. Which is different from all. A long silence. The wind moved through the juniper. Slow, cold, carrying the smell of stone and dry grass and the faint edge of the mountains. Somewhere behind Lark, one of his horses shifted weight. You could have come to me, he said, before any of this. No, she said. I could not. We could have settled. Jonas could not come to you, she said, and her voice stayed even, completely even. Because she had been carrying this for 5 years and she was not going to let it become unsteady now. Not in this yard with this man. Jonas could not come to you because Jonas knew something about this property that made coming to you impossible. And Jonas was dead before he could come to anyone else. Lark was very still. That's not something you can prove, he said. Not yet, she said, 2 words, small words. But the weight of them landed in that yard the way things land when they have been aimed precisely and released at the right moment. Lark heard them. She watched him hear them. Fenn's article, he said. It doesn't mention. No, she said. It doesn't, then why? Because when I am ready to address what is in the North Field, she said, I will address it through the appropriate legal channels, with the appropriate documentation, at a time of my choosing. Not yours, not Mr. Wace's. Mine. The words North Field landed harder than anything else she had said. She saw it in Wace first, the slight shift of weight. The eyes moving involuntarily toward the barn and then back. Then in Lark, something happened in his face. Not what she expected, not fear exactly. Something older. The expression of a man who has been waiting, for 6 years, to hear those 2 words in exactly this context, and who has just heard them, and who now understands that the waiting is over in the wrong direction. He had known. Of course he had known. He had sent a man to that property in the fall of 1879. The man had not come back. Eventually, Lark had understood that Jonas Cole had resolved one problem and created a different one, and that the different problem was buried on a piece of land Lark could not access without drawing the kind of attention he had spent 30 years learning to avoid. He had been trying to get the land for 6 years, not for the water, not for the grazing. For the same reason you do not leave something important in someone else's keeping. Because as long as it was there, and as long as she was there, it was available to be found by someone with the right eyes. She had the right eyes. She had always had the right eyes, Mr. Lark, she said. I am going to ask you one time to agree to what I have outlined. The withdrawal of the fraudulent filing. The written statement from Mr. Wace. After that, I am going to ask Harlow Finn to come in from the gate, and whatever happens in this yard from that point forward, he writes down. Lark looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she thought briefly that he was going to refuse, that he was going to do the thing that men in his position sometimes did when they had run out of legal and financial options, revert to the other kind. But then something in his face did what Wace's face had done 15 minutes earlier, a small door closing quietly. He turned to Wace. Draw up the statement, he said. Wace opened his case. It took 40 minutes. Wace wrote carefully. He was meticulous, even in defeat, which she respected as a professional quality, even as she found the man himself uncomplicated to dislike. He wrote the withdrawal notice first, then the acknowledgement of error, then the clean statement of title, which read, in Wace's precise legal language, which she reviewed twice before signing as witness, that no claim, lien, or encumbrance of any kind originating with Gideon Lark, or any entity associated with him was valid against the Cole property or its water rights, as defined by the registered boundaries of NM 1869, PG 441. She read it, read it again. Signed as witness, held out the pen to Lark. He looked at the pen, at the document. At her. You understand, he said, that this isn't the end of it. I know that, she said. What's in the North Field will be addressed through the law. Federal law, because the territorial arrangement in this area is not one I trust. She paused. You might consider getting ahead of that conversation rather than waiting for it to find you. She said it without expression, without threat, simply as information offered to a man who was going to need it, whether he wanted it or not. He took the pen, signed. Harlow Finn came through the gate 10 minutes later. He had his notebook and 2 pencils and the quietly charged energy of a man who has been waiting in a rooming house for 3 weeks and has just been told the thing he waited for is happening right now. He looked at the yard, at Lark, at Wace, at Cord standing to Vera's left, at Besh near the barn where she could see him, exactly where she had asked him to be, at Silas Quint, who was standing slightly apart from everyone, looking at the mountain to the north, with the expression of a man who has already mentally moved on to his next assignment and is leaving this one in the file. Harlow, she said. He came forward. She handed him the documents, the withdrawal, the acknowledgement, the title statement, all signed. He read them. Looked up, Mrs. Cull, he said. You'll need a follow-up piece, she said. The first article established the context. This is the resolution. Give it the space it needs. I'll give it the front page, he said. She looked at him. It's a column, she said. Not the whole page. Accurate and thorough, not dramatic. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am, he said. He began writing. Lark left first. He mounted the gray horse and rode south without looking back. The 2 functionaries went with him. Their horses' hooves on the dry road made the sound of things departing without resolution, which was the most honest sound the morning had produced. Wace packed his case, came to the base of the porch steps. For what it's worth, he said, the registration is one of the cleaner filings I've seen from that period. The margin notation particularly. She looked at him. I know it is, she said. I wrote it. He nodded. Walked to his horse. Roads, south. Quint was last of the 3. He came to the porch and looked at her with the steady, evaluative look she had come to recognize as his version of a more complicated expression. The Santa Fe Land Office is going to get more requests for prior grant records, he said. After this story runs. Good, she said. That's going to make things complicated for a number of people. I imagine it will. He looked at his satchel. Then, at her, "You've been planning this since before we arrived," he said. "I've been planning it since before you knew this property existed," she said. He considered that, and then, unexpectedly, "You should have been a lawyer." She looked at him. "I was better than a lawyer," she said. "I was the person who filed what the lawyers brought me. I saw everything, I filed all of it. And I kept copies." He almost smiled. Then he went to his horse and rode south. Cord was still on the porch when the road was empty. He had a cup of coffee. She didn't ask where he'd gotten it. He was the kind of man who found coffee the way other men found North. Naturally, without making a production of it. They stood side by side and looked at the empty road and the valley and the Sangre de Cristos in the middle distance, which were doing what they always did. Standing there, being mountains, in the excellent, uncomplicated way of things that are very old and have no stake in human arrangements. "Besh," she said, "still by the barn, he can go." Cord turned and looked at her. "He doesn't have to," he said. "I know he doesn't have to. Tell him he can. He's been standing there since 7. Cord set his cup on the porch rail, walked across the yard to where Daro Besh was leaning on the barn wall, with his hat pulled low and his eyes on the road. They spoke briefly. She could not hear what was said. Cord spoke. Besh listened. Besh looked over at the porch, then nodded. He walked to his horse, unhitched it, led it to the gate, paused there. He looked back at the porch, at Vera, turned his hat once in his hands, the rotation she had catalogued on day 1, and then put it on his head. "Ma'am," he said. "Mr. Besh," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Where does a man go?" he said. "After something like this." She thought about it. "That depends entirely," she said, "on what kind of man he decides to be between here and there." He looked at her another moment. Then he mounted road north, not south toward Ridgeback. North. Not the direction of Lark and not the direction of anything she knew about Daro Besh's Westall previous life. Just north. The direction a man rides when he is not going toward something yet, but has decided to stop going toward the wrong things. She watched him until the road took him. Harlow Finn finished his notes at noon. He came to the porch with his notebook and 2 pages of additional questions, and she answered all of them the way she would have answered questions in the records office. Completely, in sequence, without interpretation or embellishment. The document speaks for itself was what she had been trained to say about land records. She said the same thing now about her own account. He wrote it all down. When he was done, he looked at his notebook and then at her. "You contacted me 4 weeks ago," he said. "Before they arrived." "Yes. How did you know they were coming?" "I knew Lark was going to formalize the pressure eventually. He'd been applying informal pressure for 3 years. Men like that escalate to formal action when informal action stops working, or when they have a specific timeline." She paused. "The specific timeline I suspected was the territorial court session in Santa Fe this fall. The natural moment to file. And once he filed, the clock would start. So I started my clock before his." Fenn looked at his notebook. "The Northfield," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "That's for a different article," she said. "When the time is right." "When will that be?" "When I have spoken to a federal marshal, which I intend to do next week. After which you will be the second person I contact." He nodded. Wrote something. Closed the notebook. "Mrs. Cull," he said. "Vera," she said. He looked at her. "You've been alone on this property for 5 years, he said. "I have, and before that, your husband, Jonas, was here for 13 years, she said, which was not enough years. But they were good ones. Fenn looked at the valley. "I'm going to write this right," he said. "I know you are," she said. "You always have." He rode south. She found Cord at the well on the east side. He was drawing water for the horses, both bays still at the post, and his own horse, which had come over on its own because it had been a long few days and it understood about wells. She came and leaned on the stone coping and watched him work. He was good at it, quick and efficient. The movements of a man who has done this across too many years and too many places to still think about it. He did it right. The way you do things right. When doing things right is no longer a decision, but a habit that doesn't turn off when the situation turns ordinary. When the horses had drunk, he set the bucket down, looked at her. "The federal marshal," he said. "Next week," she said. "You'll want someone to ride with you to Santa Fe." She looked at him, not at the question exactly, at what was underneath the question. The thing that had been underneath most of what he had said to her since the first night. sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and his hat in his hands, telling her about a woman in a courtroom in 1871 who kept writing. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "On whether you're writing to Santa Fe," she said, "or whether you're riding to Santa Fe with me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not a big laugh. Not a young laugh. The laugh of a man in his late 40s who has not had reason to laugh in a while and finds that the laugh still works, which is its own kind of relief. "The second one," he said. "Then yes," she said. "I'll want company." He nodded, picked up the bucket, carried it back to the well. She went back to the house. That evening she sat at the kitchen table with the lamp low and her notebook open and wrote the entry for day 6. Not a long entry. She was not a person who expanded when a small thing would do. The day had been what the day had been. It had gone the way it was meant to go. She wrote, "Day 6, Lark signed. Wace withdrew. Fenn has what he needs. The North Field will require a separate process. I will begin that next week." She paused, thought about what came next. Then she wrote, "Jonas, it's done. The part I could do, it's done. What's in the ground is going to require the law, and the law is going to need to be the federal kind, because the territorial kind is still too close to the people it should be working against. I know you know that. I know you knew that when you put him there. You were out of options and you made the only choice you had, and then you carried it alone for 8 months, and I'm sorry I wasn't here for that part." She set the pen down, picked it back up. "The roof is fixed. The east fence still needs work. The winter rye is in the barn waiting to go in. There is a man named Rafe Cord who is sleeping in my barn and is going to ride to Santa Fe with me next week, which is, I think, all right. You would have had opinions about that, but I believe they would have been good opinions." She stopped, smiled, put the pen down, closed the notebook. The lamp made its small amber argument against the dark. She went to the window, looked out. The road was empty. The juniper stand was dark. The Sangre de Cristos were invisible against the darker sky, present only as the absence of stars at the horizon, which was how mountains often made themselves known, not by what they were, but by what they stood in front of. She went to the desk, took out paper, wrote, "Dear," and then the name. The only name that had ever been entirely easy to write. The name she did not have to choose or construct. The name that existed before records and after them, and regardless of them. The name that would be the same, whether she was Vera Harrow or Vera Cole, or the woman on the ridge, the unnamed one, or whatever else the valley had called her in the years she had been here. She wrote the letter slowly, told her daughter about the week, not all of it, the parts that mattered. The 3 riders who had come up the road on Monday morning, the documents on the table, the newspaper, what Lark had signed, what Wace had written, what Cord had said at the well. She wrote, "I am well. The land is mine and it is going to stay mine. Your father would have been glad to know that. I am glad to know it too, though I have known it for 4 years and the knowing has been enough, most of the time, to keep me from being afraid of the other parts." She wrote, "Come in the spring if you can. The east fence needs 2 of us." She signed it the way she always did. Not Vera Harrow, not Vera Cull, not the woman on the ridge, or the unnamed one, or the woman who had kept records for 11 years in a government office and knew every signature and every fraud and every piece of paper that had passed through those doors. Just Mother. It was the only name. She had always thought that was entirely true. She folded the letter, addressed it, set it by the door for the morning. Then she put out the lamp and went to bed and lay in the dark, listening to the ordinary sounds of the valley going about its ordinary business, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was the luxury of a person who has finished a long piece of work and set it down, and she was asleep before she expected to be, which was the best kind of sleep. Outside the Cimarron ran, the juniper stood. The mountains did what mountains do, and the land, her land, registered and witnessed and documented and signed and entirely, irrevocably, quietly hers, lay under the October dark the way land lies when no one is fighting over it anymore, still, patient, exactly as she had left it.